In eastern and southern Ukraine, the battlefield and the sky have both turned into pressure points for Russia. Over the past week, Russian losses around Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad surged by 30% as Ukrainian forces halted renewed offensive attempts, even while Ukraine faced another wave of large-scale drone and missile attacks targeting cities and civilian infrastructure. From intense ground fighting involving elite Russian airborne units, to near-total interception of drones threatening key logistics routes, and devastating strikes on Zaporizhzhia apartment buildings, these developments reveal a critical moment in the war, one where Ukraine is balancing defensive resilience at the front with the growing political and humanitarian cost of Russia's escalating air campaign. The situation around the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad agglomeration has become one of the clearest indicators that Russia's offensive momentum in eastern Ukraine is facing serious structural limits. According to Ukraine's 7th Air Assault Corps, Ukrainian defense forces are currently engaged in a complex, multi-layered defensive operation aimed not only at holding ground, but at actively exhausting Russian combat power. What stands out immediately is the scale and diversity of Ukrainian units involved: air assault forces, assault infantry, unmanned systems forces, the Navy, special operations forces, the Security Service of Ukraine, the National Guard, and the National Police. This is not an improvised defense, but a coordinated, joint force effort designed to counter Russia's most aggressive attempts to break through toward Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. Over the past week alone, Russian personnel losses in this sector reached 446 troops, marking a 30% increase compared to the previous reporting period. This spike is not coincidental. It directly coincides with Russia's decision to fully commit its operational reserve in the area, including 3 regiments from the 76th Air Assault Division, one of Russia's most elite airborne formations. Politically and militarily, this is significant. When a state begins feeding elite reserves into grinding frontal assaults, it often signals both urgency and a lack of better operational options. In this sense, Pokrovsk is becoming less a gateway for Russian advance and more a battlefield where Moscow is burning through high-quality manpower for limited gains. On the ground, Russian forces are most active on the western outskirts of Pokrovsk, attempting to push toward the village of Hryshyn, northwest of the city. These assaults are not isolated probes but coordinated advances along several routes simultaneously, suggesting an effort to stretch Ukrainian defenses and identify weak points. However, Ukrainian forces have responded with a combination of tactical containment and precision firepower. By cutting off potential advance routes and striking concentrations of Russian troops with artillery and FPV drones, Ukraine is effectively turning Russia's numerical pressure into a liability rather than an advantage. Myrnohrad presents a similar picture, though with a different tactical texture. On the southeastern outskirts of the city, Russian forces have increased pressure through infiltration tactics rather than large mechanized assaults. Small sabotage and reconnaissance groups have attempted to penetrate the approaches to what Ukrainian sources describe as Upper Myrnohrad. Yet these efforts have been repeatedly detected and neutralized, notably by units such as the 38th Separate Marine Brigade. The pattern here is revealing. Russia is probing for cracks in the defensive line, but Ukraine's situational awareness, supported by drones, reconnaissance, and local force coordination, is denying those opportunities. Equally important is Ukraine's focus on logistics, a dimension often overlooked in daily battlefield reporting. Ukrainian defense forces are actively stabilizing and expanding a logistics corridor toward Myrnohrad, particularly in the areas of Svitliai and Rivne. Isolated appearances of enemy groups in these zones have been recorded, but all were promptly eliminated. This underscores a broader strategic reality. Holding cities like Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad is not just about trench lines and firepower, but about ensuring that supply routes remain functional under constant pressure. The Pokrovsk front illustrates a growing asymmetry. Russia is committing elite airborne units and suffering rising casualties, while Ukraine is leveraging coordination, defensive depth, and relatively low-cost tools such as FPV drones to impose disproportionate losses. Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky's earlier remarks that Ukrainian troops continue to hold the defense despite increasing pressure are not just reassurances for domestic audiences. They are signals to allies that Ukrainian forces remain disciplined, adaptive, and capable of absorbing and redirecting Russian offensives. On the night of December 16, Russian forces launched a coordinated drone assault against eastern and southern Ukraine, deploying 69 strike UAVs from 4 different directions: Oriol, Primorsko-Akhtarsk, and Myrnohrad in Russia, as well as Svardiisk in the temporarily occupied Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Around 40 of these drones were Shahid-type systems, supported by Gerber drones and other UAV variants. The geographic spread of launch sites underscores Moscow's continued reliance on saturation tactics, designed to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses through volume rather than precision. Yet the results once again fell short of Russia's apparent objectives. According to preliminary data released at 9 a.m. local time, Ukrainian air defense forces shot down or electronically suppressed 57 enemy drones across the southern and eastern regions. This defensive success was achieved through a layered system combining combat aviation, anti-aircraft missile units, electronic warfare, unmanned systems, and mobile fire groups. Even as the Air Force warned that the attack was ongoing and that several UAVs remained in Ukrainian airspace, the interception rate reinforced a growing pattern. Russia can launch large numbers of drones, but it is increasingly struggling to translate those launches into decisive military effects. At the same time, 10 strike drones did reach their targets at 7 locations, a reminder that even high interception rates do not equate to full protection. This dual reality, strong air defense performance paired with unavoidable damage, defines Ukraine's current strategic dilemma. Ukraine is not aiming for perfect defense, which is practically impossible, but for damage control, protecting critical infrastructure, preserving logistics, and minimizing civilian casualties while forcing Russia to expend resources at an unsustainable rate. This logic is particularly evident around Pokrovsk, where Ukrainian forces are conducting a dedicated operation to provide aerial cover for ground logistics routes leading into the agglomeration. According to Ukrainian sources, nearly 100% of enemy aerial targets attempting to approach these routes are being destroyed. Militarily, this is a decisive achievement. Politically, it sends a clear message: Russia's strategy of isolating frontline cities through air pressure is failing in key sectors. As long as logistics corridors remain open and protected from drone attacks, Ukrainian defenders can continue to rotate units, resupply ammunition, and maintain operational tempo, all factors that directly contribute to Russia's rising casualty figures on the ground. President Volodymyr Zelensky previously stated that in the past week alone, Russia carried out one of the largest series of air attacks since the beginning of the war, launching more than 1,500 strike drones, nearly 900 guided aerial bombs, and 46 missiles of various types. These numbers are not merely statistics, they represent a strategic choice by Moscow to substitute air terror for battlefield breakthroughs. When ground advances stall, pressure shifts to the skies, especially towards civilian targets. On the night of December 14, Russian forces conducted a massive aerial attack on the Odessa region using multiple weapon types. On the evening of December 13, the Dnipropetrovsk region came under sustained strikes targeting populated areas and civilian infrastructure. That night alone, Russia used an Iskander-M ballistic missile and 138 drones, of which Ukrainian air defenses shot down 110. Such figures point to a troubling but clear trend. Russia is betting that sheer repetition and psychological pressure will achieve what military maneuver has not. The Russian drone strike on Zaporizhzhia in the early hours of December 16 brings the broader strategic picture into sharp and uncomfortable focus. At around 5 a.m. Kiev time, at least 2 Russian drones were reported flying toward the city. Roughly 30 minutes later, one of them struck a 9-story residential building. Several apartments caught fire, flames spread across the 5th and 6th floors, and civilians were forced to flee their homes in the dark. Initially, 2 people were reported injured. Later, the number rose to 3. According to Ukraine's State Emergency Service, 4 apartments covering approximately 120 square meters were engulfed in flames. Firefighters extinguished the blaze, rescued 5 residents from upper floors, 2 using a ladder truck, and psychologists assisted 10 people affected by the attack. Militarily, this strike had no operational value. There were no logistics hubs, command posts, or troop concentrations in that apartment building. Politically, however, it fits squarely into a pattern that has become increasingly visible over the past months. When Russia fails to achieve decisive results at the front, it compensates by escalating attacks on civilian areas. Zaporizhzhia, a frontline-adjacent city but firmly under Ukrainian control, has become a frequent target of drones, missiles, and guided aerial bombs. The December 16 strike was not an anomaly, it was part of a sustained campaign. Earlier incidents reinforced this assessment. On December 14, Russian forces launched 4 airstrikes on Zaporizhzhia, damaging an ATB supermarket, injuring civilians, and setting cars on fire in another area of the city. On December 7, Russian strikes again hit the city and surrounding region, damaging private houses, farm buildings, and power lines. Each attack follows the same logic: apply pressure to urban centers, disrupt daily life, and attempt to undermine public morale. Yet after nearly 3 years of war, this approach appears increasingly detached from reality. The contrast between Russia's actions on the battlefield and its behavior in the air is striking. Around Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, Ukrainian forces are systematically degrading Russian combat power, inflicting higher losses even as elite airborne units are committed. In the air, Ukraine is intercepting the majority of drones and missiles, preserving critical infrastructure and logistics corridors. The remaining damage, though tragic and unacceptable, has not produced the political or psychological collapse Moscow seems to be banking on. Each drone that burns an apartment in Zaporizhzhia strengthens Ukraine's case internationally. It reinforces arguments for more advanced air defense systems, additional ammunition, and long-term security guarantees. It also hardens Ukrainian public opinion. Rather than pressuring Kyiv into concessions, attacks on civilian buildings deepen societal resolve and reduce the political space for compromise. There is also a broader strategic signal here. The reliance on drones, guided bombs, and missiles in such quantities, over 1,500 strike drones, nearly 900 guided aerial bombs, and 46 missiles in a single week, as President Volodymyr Zelensky noted, suggests that Russia is prioritizing visible, headline-grabbing actions over sustainable military outcomes. This is a war fought as much for domestic Russian narratives as for territorial control. Explosions in Ukrainian cities can be presented to Russian audiences as evidence of strength, even when frontline realities tell a different story.